new Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games finally on the Nintendo Switch. I also talk about space heaters and thermoelectric outlets to control those space heaters. It's kind of a life hack that will save you a lot of money, legit. Also, I ordered a new laptop, so let's talk about that. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Let's get into it. Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. Yes, finally, a new, brand new show, a brand new podcast. I have been out for a minute, a couple weeks. I don't think I put out any new content, any new broadcast. I've kind of, if you've been listening to the radio show on the broadcast radio, you've most likely been listening to replays of old episodes from a year or two ago. So it wasn't soon enough of a repeat to notice a repeat, I don't think, unless you're a diehard listener, which, hey, thanks for listening if you are. Anyways, I just haven't released anything new in a moment. I actually did... I did a new broadcast a couple weeks ago, but I did not publish that as a podcast because I think I got a little bit too just ranty and ravey. I was under a lot of stress. As my regular listeners may know, my grandmother passed away, so my grandmother passed away 100 years old. She passed away just after Thanksgiving, and then we didn't do the funeral until the end of January. So it was kind of this looming thing that was kind of hanging over my head, and I was making video montages and things to play at the funeral, and I wrote a speech to say for the funeral, plus everything going on at work. For those of you who don't know, I work at the Houston Museum of Natural Science, and we have a new podcast that we've been putting out called Tut Tut, Now What? It's all about King Tutankhamun, the boy king, and that has just been causing, honestly, just to be truthful, has been causing so much stress, so much. I don't have any much more hair to fall out, but any hair that I do have has been falling out because of this podcast. And that's just to tell you that it's an excellent podcast. Tut Tut, Now What? It is reference grade. That means that people who are in college who need a source of material, if they're writing on ancient Egyptian history, Tut Tut, Now What? The podcast I'm putting together with my coworker Emma Shklovit is reference grade like that. It is a source that you can draw on for really good information about King Tut and ancient Egypt. And it's a very fun podcast. Very well put together, which just means that's one of the reasons I've just been absolutely buried. My grandmother's funeral, the Tut Tut Now What podcast I've been buried under, and I just have not had a lick of time, plus raising a 2-year-old, I just haven't had a lick of time to record a Geek Therapy Radio podcast. And by the way, I'll make a note in the podcast description too, but I'll let you know now here for the radio listener. If you're curious about that, the podcast from HMNS, from the Houston Museum of Natural Science, just go into your favorite podcast app and type Tut Tut Now What? Or maybe even type in HMNS or Houston Museum of Natural Science. But if you want to hear the podcast I'm specifically talking about, it's Tut Tut Now What? T-U-T, Now What? In your favorite podcast player. And while you're there subscribing to it, you can subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio podcast also. Which is what you're listening to. Just look for the red, white, and black color scheme for the Geek Therapy Radio podcast, and that's how you know you've got me. All right, so there is some specifics I wanted to talk about in the broadcast, the podcast this week, and that is Nintendo did a Nintendo Direct in which they finally announced, so stoked for this, that in addition to NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, N64, now they've added Game Boy and Game Boy Color. It's all underneath the Game Boy icon, and Game Boy Advance. So now we finally get Game Boy and Game Boy Color games and Game Boy Advance games on the Nintendo Switch. And here's the thing, I'll list the launch titles here in a moment, but here's the mentality of why me and others are so excited. And maybe you fall into this category too, if you're kind of a geek like me and you're into kind of handheld emulators and playing emulators on your phone and all sorts of things like that. one of the biggest wishes as a Nintendo Switch owner and as a Nintendo Switch Lite owner was I really wish Nintendo would just bring these vintage titles to the Switch. Just bring Game Boy games to the Switch, bring Game Boy Advance games to the Switch, bring Game Boy Color games to the Switch, N64, NES, Sega, all the more titles that Nintendo brings to the Nintendo Switch through their kind of retro emulation division, I guess you could call it, section of the store, the less we'll need to play these other emulators, and the less people will need to buy things like the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus and the Retroid Pocket 3 and 3 Plus and all Neos and all sorts of things. I'm not saying that though that Nintendo would destroy that market. Absolutely, positively, freaking not. I'm not saying I personally would stop buying these handheld emulators, but a big wish for me as a kind of retro gamer and a geek was like, you know what? I wouldn't need to use my Retroid Pocket if Nintendo would just release these games I'm playing on the Nintendo Switch itself. I'm already a member of Nintendo's subscription account, which is what allows you to get all these games. Like if you just put Game Boy games on the Nintendo Switch, then I wouldn't need to be using a bunch of other emulators a lot of the time. So I guess mainly it boils down to convenience. Like now I don't have to put down the Switch when I'm done playing, Mario Golf on the Switch to play Mario Golf on the Game Boy Color. I don't have to use an emulator for Game Boy Color. I don't have to pick up my actual OG Game Boy Color to play. Now I can just play all the same games on the Nintendo Switch. It's a convenience thing. So now we finally have Game Boy Color, and also Game Boy Advance titles available on the Switch. I'm running out of time on this segment. I'm going to tell you in the next segment what those titles are, what the launch titles are for Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, because there's a couple of them that's like, okay, but then the rest of them, like, yeah, totally. I totally understand. It's awesome that they included these games. There's not very many launch titles right at launch here, not to sound redundant, but I'm going to tell you what they are coming up in the next segment of Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. Well, it is the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast because whether you're listening to this on the AM radio or not, you can download the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Of course, the iHeartRadio app and Apple. Just search for Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's how you got me. We'll be right back with more Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. Just welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. If you're listening to this on the terrestrial radio, welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You can download the Geek Therapy Radio Podcast and subscribe to it in your favorite podcast player. So the iHeartRadio app, of course, Spotify, Spreaker, Pocket Casts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, however you listen to podcasts. Just search for Geek Therapy Radio Podcast and look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's how you know you've got me. All right, so as promised, to recap, because there are probably 4 or 5 minutes of commercials if you're listening to the radio broadcast, maybe forgot what we're talking about. Nintendo did their Nintendo Direct a couple days ago where they announced, the new things coming to Nintendo Switch, Nintendo in general. But one of the things they announced, a couple of the things they announced, finally, thank God, are games for Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. They finally come to the Play Store in Nintendo Switch. Play Store? Nintendo eShop. What do they call it now? I'm so bogged down with what was it in 3DS? What was it on DS? What is it on Switch? I believe it's the eShop. Let me go to the homepage here. I know I'm saying, Nintendo eShop. You ever say words, and this happens all the time, where you say a word and you're like, that doesn't sound right, but it totally is right, but it still doesn't sound right. That was me with Nintendo eShop just now. Also, real quick, before I get into what titles are available at launch for the Game Boy section and Game Boy Advance section, oftentimes I go back and listen to these episodes after I record them. sometimes I go back maybe a few weeks after, and I'll hear myself in this broadcast and in this podcast misspeak. And I just hope y'all can kind of infer from the context where I misspeak. And it's usually things like megahertz and gigahertz and kind of like pedantic particulars like that, terabyte, gigabyte. I may do some kind of misspeaking on those terms, but you know what? Y'all know what I mean. Use the context clues, and I apologize for misspeaking sometimes, but it happens. Stream of consciousness, it happens. And I don't even remember that I say it I don't even catch it until a few weeks later after the podcast has been out and percolating throughout the web. I'm like, misspoke there, but hopefully they understood what I'm saying, what they meant. Anyways, and I know y'all do. Most of y'all. Some of y'all are just looking for anything to complain about, and it's just low-hanging fruit. So anyways. All right, Game Boy titles. So when you download the Game Boy portion of this virtual console in the eShop, I believe it's underneath Nintendo Switch Online. Let me go back. I keep saying these things while I'm actively recording a podcast. So you go to Nintendo eShop. For those of you, who may not know, under Nintendo Switch Online. So the menu on the left says featured, recent releases, great deals, best sellers, coming soon, Nintendo Switch Online, and then enter code. So under Nintendo Switch Online is where you're going to find the virtual console for everything, for the N64, for the NES, for SNES, for Sega Genesis, for, in this case, Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. So let me open up Game Boy, and under Game Boy, you're also going to have the Game Boy Color games. There's no two separate, tiles, things to download for Game Boy and Game Boy Color. They're all just under Game Boy. So the list, drum roll sound effect, which I'm probably too lazy to put in. The launch titles are Alone in the Dark. Okay, which I guess that's just kind of I don't know much about the Alone in the Dark port for the Game Boy Color. I have played it a couple times just out of curiosity's sake, and it was very interesting. I can't comment on how good of a game it is. I can't say whether it's a good or bad game because I just haven't played through enough of it to know. It is, however, a very fascinating thing to see Alone in the Dark, which is a 3D-based third-person type game, ported to the Game Boy Color. And basically what they had to do back in the day was there's no way you're going to do a direct port from, PlayStation or whatever to the Game Boy Color. You're going to have to basically remake the entire game and try to stay as true to it as possible. And I think that's what they've done with Alone in the Dark on Game Boy Color. It's certainly a fascination. It's certainly a curiosity, which is why I think they included it on this list. Next game is Game & Watch Gallery 3. Okay, neat addition, I guess. I don't think too many people are going to be very excited about that, but it's cool to have. Game & Watch galleries are really cool, like little mini games. I think most people by this time are probably most familiar with Game & Watch gallery type stuff because that's basically what WarioWare, where you did all those mini games. Like you had 3 seconds to complete each minigame. It's kind of like Game & Watch Gallery-esque. The next one is, I believe, Gargoyle's Quest. I got to click on it to actually open it up because I can't see these small little screens, small little titles on this Game Boy. Sorry, on this Nintendo Switch. Gargoyle's Quest. It's an offshoot of Ghosts and Goblins. So Gargoyle's Quest, Ghosts and Goblins. Apparently, I've heard, I was watching Wolf Den earlier, that YouTube channel Wolf Den, Bob Wolf, I think his name is, mention that he's heard of this game and he heard that it was really good, but he's never played it. I kind of fall in that same category. I've heard that it's a good game. I've heard that it's one of the best, as like Bob said, for the Game Boy, but I have not played it, which is great that Nintendo chose to include it as a launch title under the new Game Boy Virtual Console. Now, the next game is an absolute no-brainer for Game Boy or Game Boy Color. It is, of course, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. And the version they have in here, let me just play this music here in the microphone. Oh, yeah. So it's great that they included the DX version here. It would be cool if they included both, if you just play the quote-unquote black and white version. But the DX version is the one that's enhanced for color, for Game Boy Color. It is the version of Link's Awakening to play. And, of course, they included it here as a launch title. And it needs no introduction. It needs no explanation as to why they've included it. It is just a staple. It is arguably the best game ever on Game Boy. And I know there are some people bristling who would, argue to the counterpoint, well, Pokemon is the best game for Game Boy. Like, well, that's why it's arguable. I think that I personally like Link's Awakening better. Nothing against Pokemon. I love Pokemon, Pokemon Blue, Pokemon Red, which, mark my words, those will come to the Virtual Console too eventually. You're going to see some Pokemon games on under the Game Boy tile of the Virtual Console. But for me personally, Link's Awakening, I still haven't beat it. I've gotten so far into it in my life, but I just haven't beat it. I'm just not. I don't know. That's just me. That's just how I game. I just haven't finished it yet. The next one over here, next title, Metroid 2: Return of Samus. Awesome. Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. Wish they would include the original Super Mario Land. They will eventually. I hope they do at least. But Super Mario Land 2, if you're going to choose between one or two for a launch title, of course, Super Mario Land 2 is going to be the choice. And Tetris. Just the Tetris, the OG Tetris that shipped with the original Game Boy back in 1989, I think, when it was released. And the last title is Wario Land 3. Probably the best looking Game Boy Color game. One of the best platformers, period, for the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy in general. So Wario Land 3 is the last title that is available at launch in the Nintendo eShop under the Game Boy Virtual Console. I couldn't be more excited. I am so stoked that we finally got Game Boy and Game Boy Color games to the Virtual Console and the Nintendo Switch. This is just amazing. There's a few other things on my wish list. You let me know. Email me. Go to geektherapyradio.com and just the contact form right in the front. Just let me know what Game Boy games you'd like to see come to Nintendo Switch. I'd like Mario Golf to come to Game Boy Color and some other games. Let's talk about what games are available at launch for the Game Boy Advance Virtual Console. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. I just yelled almost at the top of my lungs. I'm in an empty house right now, which is why I'm able to record this broadcast for you, but I almost yelled at the top of my lungs, no! Because I heard air coming out of my vent, out of my air conditioning vent. It is February as of recording. It's a little chilly outside, and the heater kicked on in the house, and I'm just like, no! I'm such a freaking dad that whenever I hear the heater turn on in my house, which, by the way, is not a gas heater, it is electrical resistive heating for the central air conditioning unit here in the house, which is god-awful way to heat your home. Anyways, I've got central electric heating, and just it sucks back 15 kilowatts an hour at least. 15 kilowatts an hour to heat a whole bunch of house that I'm not in. I am just in my studio right now, just in my little 100 square foot off room here, man cave here. And I don't need the heater on to heat the whole house when I'm just in this room. So that's why I kind of freak out. No, the heater's on. The central AC heating's on because I just hear a bunch of dollar bills flying through all the vents around my very poorly insulated house. So anyways, I got on my phone real quick because it is the year 2023, and I turned off my heating with my smart thermostat just through the app on my phone. I didn't have to get up off of my geek butt to go turn off the air conditioning. I just tapped something on my phone, turn that crap off. And now it's off, and now I don't have to worry about it wasting money anymore. So anyways, I kind of want to talk about that heating here just for a moment, just a sidetrack, because my geek brain's getting distracted here. I do want to talk about the launch titles for the Game Boy Advance portion of the Nintendo Switch Virtual Console for under Game Boy Advance. I will talk about it in a minute. But there's been something that I've been wanting to do a YouTube video on this, maybe like a YouTube short or something like this. But I'm just going to tell you in the podcast here or the broadcast, depending on where you live in the world. If you're listening to the podcast and you live in a cold climate, even if you're listening to the radio here in Houston, sometimes it gets pretty nippy. The past couple years, we have had some it's like crazy for me to say this. It's an understatement for me to say this. We've had some cold snaps, which have actually done some damage to the grid here in Texas. That's a whole separate story, but it gets chilly in Houston, is all I'm trying to say. And I found this, since I hate running my central heating because my house is terribly insulated and it's just a big time waste of money, I've kind of been scooping up space heaters. A variety of space heaters. I don't have any infrared space heaters, but I do have oil-filled space heaters and traditional ceramic, heating element space heaters. I find that I like oil space heaters the best. You can find them for under $100 on Amazon, between probably $40 and $100, depending on how good you want it. I think you can probably spend a couple $100 on really, really, really fancy oil-filled heaters. But 1,500 watt oil-filled heater. The best solution I found is to have them in the rooms where I'm going to be. So I've got one in the living room, and I've got one in the nursery, Riker's room. I've got one in my office and in our bedroom. They are not on all the time. Only when needed. And I've had, there's parents out there whose red flag went up. You got a heater in your son's bedroom. Yes, but it is one designed for nurseries. It has all the safety features in the world. There's no surface on it that's hot to the touch. It has the tip over shut off. It has all sorts of safety features. It's designed and built for nurseries. It's not just like I put a garage space heater with a big glowing orange element right next to Riker's crib, Riker's bed. No, it's not like that. It's an actual nursery heater. So anyways, that's not the point. The point is that I do have space heaters, safe space heaters where I need them in the house where we are. But the life hack here that I found, and maybe some of you already know this, is you can buy they're called electrostatic outlets. Basically, what you do is it's a plug that you plug the space heater into in the wall. In the plug, you can define and program at what temperature do you want this plug to turn on, and at what temperature do you want this plug to turn off. So you take a dumb space heater, like a dumb oil-filled heater or a dumb ceramic heater, and you just set the remote. The temperature sensor is in the remote, so you set the remote where you are, like where you're going to be sitting, where you're going to be hanging out. And I set it to something like, all right, come on below 70 and then shut off above 72 degrees Fahrenheit, for those of you listening around the world who are thinking that you'll be dead if you're at 70 degrees Celsius, which you will be. No, I set these thermostatic outlets to come on below 70 and shut off above 72. And that's what I have my dumb space heaters plugged into. That has saved so much money on monthly bills just warming the room in the space that you're in. And it's automatic when you have it go into this the electrostatic outlet, and you program it with the remote control to only come on at certain temperatures. It's not just running all the time. So one of the things I found with like a space heater, like a 1,500 watt space heater, whether it's oil filled or whatever, is that it's very hard to dial in what temperature you want. The thing is, either are always on or it's off, or it's just running 24 hours and getting things too warm, too hot, sucking up too much money. No, you use this programmable outlet, this thermostatic outlet, to come on only when you need to. And I can shut the actual space heater off when I'm obviously going to be gone or after Riker wakes up or whatever. But that way, with this solution, just a dumb space heater and a programmable thermoelectric wall outlet, It just comes on when it needs to, keeps the room where you are and at between a comfortable 70 or 72 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever temperature you want. It's very efficient. It's the most efficient way to warm the space that you are without worrying about if the space heater is going to be on too much or too little. You just program it to come on between an actual 70 degrees to 72 degrees, whatever you want, and it just does it automatically. So that's for me. Before we get back to Game Boy Advance stuff, for me, I don't. It's not that I hate that I have to turn heaters on that are like the central air conditioning turns on. What I hate is that the house is so inefficient that I'm just pouring money out the window. I'm okay to spend the money I need to spend to stay comfortable efficiently. That's my whole thing, is just use every single watt as efficiently as possible. So a dumb space heater paired with a smart thermostat, basically programmable thermostat wall outlet, means that I'm warming the space I'm in as efficiently as possible. It comes on and off automatically, so I'm staying comfortable for as efficiently financially as possible, and it's just a good situation in a good setup. So, anyways, I'll probably do a YouTube short or a YouTube video on that at some point, just to kind of explain, because there are a lot of people that probably already know that. Maybe there's people in northern climates already do this, but you don't have to run your central AC to keep you warm while you're taking a dump. Sorry, somewhere off in your house. Like, you don't need to keep 2,000 square feet warm because you're occupying 10 square feet to do your business, or 100 square feet, however big your bathroom is. You get what I'm saying. Anyways, I'm running out of time on this segment, so I'm going to save the Game Boy Advance launch titles to the end. Actually, let's see what I can get through here. Game Boy Advance launch titles. Kuru Kuru Kurin. Never played that. Looks like a puzzle game. Maybe some of y'all are more familiar than me. Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. Awesome. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, awesome. Mario Kart Super Circuit, of course. Super Mario Advance 4, which is Super Mario Brothers 3 for the NES. It's an enhanced version of. It's kind of like, do you remember the game Super Mario All-Stars for the SNES that had the original Super Mario Brothers Lost Levels, Super Mario Brothers 2, and Super Mario Brothers 3, and then a later edition included Super Mario World? It's like that version of Super Mario Brothers 3. The enhanced version, so you're not looking at the old 8-bit pixels. It's kind of like an enhanced 16-bit version of Super Mario Brothers 3. And then you have the last one. There's only 6 launch titles here. I'm glad I got into it before the end of the segment. It's what the game I was talking about earlier, WarioWare Inc. It's the first one, WarioWare, where you're doing all a bunch of mini games, which kind of reminds me of Nintendo Game & Watch gallery type games, except they look way better, they're more enhanced. WarioWare is such a fun game. Like, that is my existence in 2004 when I lived in Austin with my 2 roommates, Andrew and Brad. We played so much WarioWare, and we even came up with a song called Space Boy that was inspired by a game in WarioWare. So those are the 6 launch titles. Again, it's Kuru Kuru Kurin, which I think is a Japanese game. Zelda Minish Cap, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, Mario Kart Super Circuit, Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario Brothers 3, and WarioWare Inc. Awesome games at launch. So let's keep talking about some geek stuff coming up. I ordered a new laptop. It's going to get here any moment. I have a new Galaxy Z Fold 4 that I have been using for a month or so. Let's talk about that next segment. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. You can grab the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast app. So, of course, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you listen to podcasts. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio podcast. Look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's how you know you've got me. All right, so at the end of the last segment, I teased that I want to talk about a little bit about my Galaxy Z Fold 4, my new smartphone, and the new laptop I have ordered. First, I'm going to talk about the laptop I have on order that should get here. It says arriving on Monday, but then I check UPS's own website and it says it should get here today as of recording. I'm recording on a Friday. Should get here before the end of the day. I'm managing expectations and just expecting it on Monday, but we'll see. I'm actually going to pull up the UPS tracking right now as I record and go to shipping details and see what's up with it. So let's see the updates. View details. Shipment progress. It's on the way. It's in San Antonio, Texas right now, and it came from Florida. So if it's in San Antonio, actually, where was it in San Antonio? It was in San Antonio at 8:05 p.m. last night. It's theoretical that it could get here today. If it was in San Antonio, 14 hours ago, as of recording. So whatever. The laptop, that's all you care about. You don't care about when I get it because this ain't real time. By the time you're listening to this, I might already have it. I ordered, and you might be thinking, oh man, is it one of the new RTX 4090 laptops? Is it the new 4000 series laptop GPU? No, I didn't get an MSI Titan 77 with a RTX 4090 or anything like that. No. I did get an MSI. I did order an MSI. I ordered an MSI GE77hx Raider. So the difference, by the way, because this confused me, I'll get to the specs of it. The specs is part of the naming moniker. I was confused between the Raider GE76 and the Raider GE77hx. I was like, what's the difference between 77 and the 76? Is one newer or what? So the 77HX model, those are the ones that come with up to the i9, I think it's 12900HX, or the i7 12800HX. So that's the 77HX part of the Titan series, or not Titan, the Raider series, is that it comes with the HX versions of the i9 or the i7. I got the i7, which apparently, I'm looking around, is apparently faster than the i9 in some workloads. Don't quote me on that, but in my just kind of glancing overview and reading reviews and things it's like the 1200HX is faster than the 12900HX i9. I don't quote me on that. That's just some things I think that I've been seeing, which is kind of peculiar. The 12800HX is a 16-core processor. 8 of those cores are hyper-threaded. The performance cores are hyper-threaded, and then you have 8 more efficiency cores that are not hyper-threaded. So it's like 24 logical cores. That's mind-boggling. In the 12800HX, the i7 turbos up to 4.8 before you overclock, because you can overclock and undervolt the HX series in a laptop. It can pull up to, I believe it's 150 watts for the processor in a laptop. By the way, for those of you who don't know, the Raider series, not the Raider series, but the 7 series of the Raider, it's a 17.3 inch laptop. It's a 17.3 inch screen. I wanted the biggest screen available on a laptop within reason. There are technically some 18 inch screen laptops. I think way back when, I think MSI released a Titan that was a 21 inch or 21.9 inch ultra wide display, which is crazy. I think it had 2 GTX 980s in it. No, but the one I got, the Raider GE77hx, the 12800, the i7 12800HX processor can pull up to 150 watts, and the GPU in it is the RTX 3070 Ti. So it's 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM and all the rest. So it's an RTX 3070 Ti, and it can pull up to 175 watts. Remember, this is a laptop. So it's like total combined, the output of the system can if you're using both at the same time, CPU and GPU, the maximum power that the laptop can output is 250 watts. So it does do this kind of balancing act. So if you're at 175 watts on the GPU, 75 watts left for the CPU. Oh no, only 75 watts for the CPU in a laptop when your 175 watt GPU is at full tilt. Typically most laptops max out for just the normal, even for gaming laptops, the normal TDP for a laptop processor is around 45 watts. It can briefly turbo boost above that to like 80 watts or something like that for very brief moments, but the typical nominal TDP for even gaming laptops, normal laptops, is 45 watts. So the fact that the GE77hx Raider only has 75 watts left over for the CPU, if the GPU is pulling 175 watts, is redonkulous. Those are redonkulous specs. It is every bit of a desktop replacement. Now, I didn't necessarily buy it to be a desktop replacement, but in my normal work life, my everyday workload, every day that I use a laptop, I've said this many times before, I use a laptop 95% of the time and maybe a desktop 5% of the time. So I've got the desktop. You all know what it is. It's an old quote unquote, Ryzen 9 3900X 12-core 24-thread processor with an RTX 3090 as the GPU. And I find myself not needing it that often. Usually a powerful laptop takes care of what I need day to day. I'll bust out the 3090 desktop, like I'll turn on my Beast rig if I'm working on an edit or something, a video edit that maybe needs a little bit more boost, like I'm doing more Fusion edits within DaVinci Resolve, then I'll call upon the 3090 then 24 gigs of GDDR6 VRAM to help that along a little bit. For the most part though, laptop is fine. I wanted a 17.3-inch screen because I just threw my hands up finally as a 39-year-old man as of recording with glasses, big, thick glasses. Like, for day-to-day work, I'm tired of looking at small screens. I've got my daily workhorse that I'm recording this onto right now, my 2021 Asus Zephyrus G14. Excellent laptop, 14-inch screen. The screen itself obviously looks brilliant. It's a very high refresh rate screen, 144 hertz, 100% sRGB for video editing and photo editing. It's just small. It's just a small screen. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm working on a laptop most of the time, I might as well have the biggest screen laptop that I can get reasonably. And that was I went with the GE77hx Raider, 17.3-inch screen, i7 12800HX, and the RTX 3070 Ti. So the specs of my G14, the outgoing laptop that I am putting up for sale, is it's got the Ryzen 9 5900HS processor, 8-core, 16-thread, brilliant processor, and the GPU is the RTX 3060, 6GB VRAM. It has been an exceptional laptop. There's nothing wrong with it. I freaking love this thing. I just won't be able to justify keeping both. When I know there's still value in my old laptop, why not sell it? So the G14 is going up for sale. I have no complaints about the laptop itself. Really, I don't. The keyboard backlighting could be better, but like, it's an excellent laptop. It is like one of the best gaming laptops the world has ever seen for very good reason. That's not just me saying it. That's all the reviews. G14, get a G14. Well, I just wanted a bigger screen. You are worthy of love. I guess I'll talk about my Z Fold 4 in the next episode, how it's been for me. It's been great, but I want to give it a little bit more love than just a few seconds here on the way out. You are worthy of love. You're worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love. And you're worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Thank you so much for bearing with me over the past month or two as I've dealt with the death of my grandmother and stress at work, and I haven't been able to put out as many broadcasts or podcasts. I love you all. Thank you so much for just sticking with me through the recent inconsistencies. I'll talk to you next week. You've been listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Take care.